Hello, Ray. So you're asking me a very complicated series of questions here. You're asking me if I'm talking about democratic backsliding, where several countries, democracies, or republics are eroding personal rights. How do you combat them in a system that overall seems to favor that natural development over time? For instance, in the United States, it is incredibly difficult to be represented unless you're wealthy. The wealthy have two political parties. The working class ultimately doesn't really have a political party that represents them. This is a great question to ask because it's about affecting change, and that is the million-dollar question in politics. How do you affect positive change that lasts as opposed to change that simply just degrades back into where you started? You're also asking some really pertinent questions like, for instance, is this actually democratic backsliding? Are we seeing these personal freedoms erode, or is this how the system is supposed to work? In that it will always serve the interests of the wealthy, and they claim to serve the interests of regular people like you and me. However, that is only just an illusion. Those are great questions to ask, and the first thing I want to preface it with is that, in my opinion, the United States federal government was never meant to serve a population this large. For example, take a look at the United Kingdom's parliament, where they have 650 members of the House of Commons, 825 members of the House of Lords. In contrast to this, in the United States, which has 6 times the population of the UK, there are only 435 voting members of the House of Representatives, plus 6 non-voting delegates. There are 100 senators, plus the President of the Senate, the Vice President, which makes for a total of 536 voting representatives in a Congress that is supposed to serve a country of 340 million people. Each representative in the House is supposed to speak for 700,000 people, which is infeasible. The average human being can only maintain relationships with about 300 people at a time. So what happens? Well, in order to stand out, it helps to have money, which means that only the wealthy people are able to petition for change, which means that over time, the US Congress has gradually overrepresented the interests of the wealthy. I don't think that was by design. I think the founding fathers simply overlooked certain possibilities that are very hard to predict in the future, and they didn't have very much reference for how republics operated because there weren't very many examples of republics when they were writing the Constitution in the 1700s. Now, with that being said, how do you affect positive change, and how do you control certain things like the rise of fascism in the United States? Liberals are more incrementalists. They believe in gradual change over time within the system itself. They believe that through policy reform, enabling more personal rights for people, and further encouraging representation and enfranchisement, things will improve. Leftists and progressives are a bit more accelerationist. They believe that the system itself is corrupt and it needs to be upended to become more representative of the people and to stop exploitation of the vulnerable. This can be done in various ways, such as through a revolution or through conditions getting so bad that people openly demand change. There's flaws to both of these, such as how incrementalism often doesn't address the systemic issues at their very core, instead addressing symptomatic issues that are superficial at best, and accelerationism not really accounting for certain failures in their own belief systems. For instance, trying to upend a two-party system by voting for a non-viable third-party candidate is one common thing that I saw last year. But that is the trillion-dollar question. How do you enact systemic change in a political system? How do you get people to cede their wealth and power? The first priority is giving people more time, because people don't have enough time to assess their situation, let alone protest, let alone petition for change. And because people are overworked, this also makes certain things like fascism more appealing. Because fascism is a very easy to understand narrative. Under fascism, it's simply, all your problems are because of this group of people, eliminate this group of people, elect me, all your problems go away. That's a very simple and easy to understand narrative. However, trying to understand the complex nature of the economy, the socioeconomic details of a country that is a melting pot of immigrants, well, that takes a lot of time to understand, and not everybody has that. This is where I lean more into incrementalism, because I believe that if you give people more time through small policy reforms, then they can better assess their situations and represent themselves. This can be things such as consumer protection laws, worker rights, or even just something as simple as simplifying the tax filing process. For example, I don't think that it's a coincidence that there were so many workplaces unionizing after the pandemic. I believe that it gave people enough time to realize how precarious their situation was and the importance of unionizing to protect themselves. I fully support that, and I believe that if we give people more time, we can see more people better representing themselves and unionizing in order to hold these corporations in check and provide more rights to workers. Now, what about accelerationism? What do I feel about that? I will admit, however, my understanding of accelerationism is rather limited. From what I can tell, some of it is either unrealistic, such as voting for non-viable candidates in a two-party system, to sometimes just being simply dangerous, such as attempting to overthrow the government through a revolution. I believe that if there is a revolution, that it will most likely be violent in the United States because we have a culture of violence, and I don't have the heart to advocate for a revolution because I know that a lot of people I care about would be most likely to die. At the same time, however, I do sympathize heavily with people like Luigi Mangione. After learning about what Brian Thompson was doing systemically at United Healthcare, I'm not surprised that Luigi did what he did, because violence is often a means of communication when people have no other means of recourse, where if you can't say or do anything or get anyone to understand you, people will often lash out, and that includes violence. There's also several logistical issues that often lead to volatility when it comes to accelerationism. For instance, if you eliminate the government, well, you still need people to do daily tasks. You need clerks, you need attendants, you need receptionists, and you need thousands of people essentially to run a government. So usually what happens, historically speaking, is that those positions get replaced hastily with people who are less competent or people who are more susceptible to corruption, which leads to more corruption over time. I also believe that utilizing the threat of violence in order to protect and secure your own rights is an effective tool in politics, and one example of that would be the Seminole Nation in Florida, where they fought against the Indian Removal Act, and it was difficult, it was bloody, but at the end of the day, they did better for themselves. They protected their land. In short, give people more time so they can understand their situation. Hopefully this leads to them assembling and using their power collectively, which then holds these corporations in check, which may include using the threat of violence, while also encouraging competition between the United States and other countries so that there's more pressure on the US government to provide more for its people, and hopefully enact systemic change.